The injuries keep on coming. Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, Isaiah Pacheco, Christian McCaffrey, Tua Tagovailoa, Evan Ingram, Deebo Samuel, Joe Mixon, Keenan Allen, Rashad White. I'd keep going, but I ran out of breath. Waivers are vital this week, so let's rip into it on the Fantasy First Down. Let's start with the good news first. At least guys like Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown seem to have avoided serious injuries, but there's a heap of players you're needing to replace from waivers. So today we're going to talk about all the best pickups and how you can find some values lower on the waiver wire as well. If you haven't already, it would be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow us on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. That's where I release all of my rankings first. On Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. And my website is ffdfantasyfootball.com. That's where you'll find my rankings, and my articles are at football.rasball.com. But let's talk about waivers. I'm going to go through every position and talk about what I think are the best waiver pickups. You can also see on the graphic that I've included their ownership percentage. That's according to Yahoo Leagues. If you've got a better source, send it to me because I would love to use it. My favorite pickup this week is Sam Darnold. He's just looked really good the first couple of weeks. He's basically looked like he's playing really good football, and he's done that without Jordan Addison and at times without Justin Jefferson. He just seems to be balling out. He's also rushing a little bit, which is really helpful. He's available in most leagues. Doesn't have the greatest matchup this week in the Texans, but I'd love to pick him up if I need a second quarterback or if I just need support there. He's my favorite pickup by a mile. Baker Mayfield's a guy I've talked about for the last couple of weeks. He's been my favorite streamer the last 2 weeks, and he has balled out both weeks, and I just frankly haven't been surprised. He can just be really good for football sometimes, and it has been exactly the case here. And I expect that he's going to have another good week against Denver. He's a useful person to have on your roster. I do feel like he's going to cool off a little bit later on as the season goes on, so you might even be able to sell him for something. Derek Carr gets Philly. He's been fantastic the last 2 weeks as well. Kind of surprisingly so, given he doesn't really have many people to pass to outside Kamara and Olave and Rashid Shaheed, but they are making it work, especially Kamara through the air. So Carr against Philly, you got to be happy with that matchup. And finally, Justin Fields, you're probably getting another week or two maybe out of him. Don't know if Russell Wilson's going to be back this week or not. Fields is a solid option. He just has that rushing floor, though he didn't use it last week, and he ended up being like mildly effective. So I don't know. He's not one of my favorite pickups, but he is a viable option if you do need a lower bench option. Now let's talk about the running backs where things get really interesting. Jordan Mason, obviously, is still available in some leagues. These are the very shallow starting waiver options. These guys aren't going to be available in most leagues. I'm not going to talk about them for too long, but there are leagues out there where these guys are available. Jordan Mason really shouldn't be in your league, but his ownership percentage is far from 100%. So pick him up if he's still out there. It's crazy that he is still there, but if he is, make sure you grab him. Zach Charbonnet has been very high on my handcuff list that I do in my streamers and stashes article, and also talk about on my streamers and stashes video. Charbonnet obviously is always going to get the workload whenever Kenneth Walker goes down, and Kenneth Walker gets injured all the time. And oh, look at that. Kenneth Walker got injured. So unfortunately that happened after waivers and after my streamers and stashes video, so I wasn't really able to include him. But this week, he's still available in like 30% of leagues. So go pick up Charbonnet if you haven't already. Walker should be out for another week or two. Charbonnet is going to get a heavy workload. He also gets Miami, who's actually a pretty good rushing matchup. They've allowed the 8th most points to running backs so far this season. Devin Singletary is another guy who's just getting a solid workload. He's available in some leagues, which is a little bit crazy to me. So go pick him up if you need a running back who you can start. It's not a great matchup this week, but he's at least a starting option as opposed to most of the other guys who are either in committees or kind of backups. And Zach Moss, you could arguably have him over Singletary if it's just a 1 week thing. His stats aren't very good, but he's getting the full workload. They're barely using Chase Brown, which is a bit of a surprise. Zach Moss is the clear number 1 guy at the moment. I do think he's going to be a lot better because we know that Commanders matchup is real juicy. Mostly through the air, but also on the ground. I think Joe Burrow is going to be fantastic this week. He's a must start unless you've got a really elite quarterback option. Jamar Chase is going to be one of my top wide receivers. T. Higgins is going to be good unless he's badly limited. You might even be able to get something out of Mike Gesicki. So any Bengals this week are going to be great. And we're going to talk about another Bengal later on as well. Now, here are some deeper starting waiver options. Obviously, Isaiah Pacheco has broken his fibula. I've done that. It's extremely painful. Definitely the most painful injury I've ever had, and it takes a while to get back. And in my case, I just absolutely never regained my explosiveness. Now, to be fair, mine was 20 years ago, and medical science has improved a lot since then, but I'm a little bit nervous for Pacheco. People saying that he could be back within 3 or 4 months. I'd be surprised. And even if he is, he's not going to be the same player. So I would expect that he's someone that you're probably not going to get much out of for the rest of the season. Obviously, NFL teams have all the best medical science, and it is possible they will make things happen. We see that happen all the time with players, but I'd be very nervous if I was a Pacheco owner. For that reason, it's really interesting to see what they do with their starters. I think Carson Steele gets the first crack at it, but I do expect they also go and pick up Kareem Hunt as well. What that looks like, I don't know. Even if they sign Hunt for this week, Steele will still be the main guy, and Pirine will be doing the receiving work. I always want the Chiefs goal line back. I think that probably Steele. We've seen he's been the goal line back and short yardage back at times, even when Pacheco's been healthy. So I do think now that Pacheco's out, it is probably Steele that they use. Very risky starting him this week, but he's someone that you absolutely have to pick up if you're struggling at running back, because he could potentially be the guy. We saw him being used that way in the preseason. Also, don't be surprised if they go and grab, I don't know, Deneric Prince again off Miami's practice squad, for example. Obviously, he was being used at times last season, or just sign a veteran of some sort, and that'll obviously mess things up, but it's worth going and getting Steele just in case. Chuba Hubbard was productive last week. He took over a lot of the role that Miles Sanders kind of took in the in week one. Sanders is still doing quite a bit of receiving work, but Hubbard's getting a little bit more now. I think with Andy Dalton, this offense could function a little bit better. For that reason, you might find that you get something out of Hubbard. Hubbard's someone that you could start if you're kind of a little bit desperate. He's a deeper option. He's available in like half of leagues. It's crazy to me. I don't know what leagues have Hubbard available, but apparently a lot do. And for that reason, I'm willing to pick him up if you're a little bit desperate. Rico Dowdle actually started for the Cowboys over Zeke. Zeke ultimately ended up playing similar amount of drives and ended up getting slightly more snaps because of the lengths of the drives. But Dowdle is technically nominally the starter. It's inconvenient that Juice Vaughn even got involved. I think it was trying to get this offense going. Dowdle hasn't played particularly well, but he's played a little bit better than Zeke. Zeke's better in pass protection, so he's never going to take over the full role, but he at least has a little bit of upside. So Dowdle's someone you can pick up if you're in a deeper league and you need someone that might get into a starting role because you are struggling just to have any starters. Donta Foreman as well for Cleveland. There was an injury to Pierre Strong. Foreman becomes the clear backup. He was probably becoming the backup anyway. It did seem like he was getting a lot of snaps. And in fact, he played ahead of Jerome Ford at times in the game. In fact, he had 14 rushes. Ford had like 8. Now, Ford was more productive on those rushes. I don't really know what they're doing with Foreman. They released him, and then he played 1 snap last week, and then all of a sudden he's getting 14 rushes and a reception. It's really bizarre, but something's going on here. So if you need a guy who might potentially be starting, Foreman's someone you can pick up, and you might get starting production out of him, or at least committee production out of him for a couple of weeks until Nick Chubb possibly comes back. Waiver stashes. This is where it's really at for running backs. In most leagues, unless you're struggling for starters, this is who you should have on your bench. You don't need guys like Dowdle on the bench unless you need bye week fill-ins. You certainly don't need guys who've got limited upside. You want guys who are going to be league winners if the right things happen. That's why I talked about guys like Charbonnet. And for me, if any of these guys gets an injury ahead of them, they become a league winner. The reason I've got Bucky Irving first is because it is possible he actually takes over from Richard White and just becomes the starter on merit. The chances of that happening are pretty low, but it's better than the chances of any of these other guys taking over and getting that same workload and quality out of him. Irving was very good last week, not as good this week, but still better than White. White's still getting all of the receiving work, but it is possible that Irving turns this into at least a committee and then becomes a functional option for you. If you're really strong at running back and you just need stashes that have the most upside, Irving doesn't have the most upside, but he's probably got the most accessible upside. Also worth noting that Rashad White is injured as well. I believe he has a groin injury, though he is expected to still play this coming week. Braylon Allen, we saw how good he can be. I talked about him a lot in the preseason. He was my favorite rookie throughout the preseason until week 2, where he played behind Isaiah Davis, and I was a little bit confused. But he is clearly the backup. He's someone that I really like. I would have him on my bench in any league where he's available. He just has the most upside by far. He's going to be fantastic if Breece Hall is out. He is such a talented player. It's a bit of a shame for him that he got drafted behind Hall, because I think he should be a starter in the league. If Hall goes down, Braylon Allen is going to be a league winner. Put him on your bench now so you don't have to fight people for him later on. Ty Chandler has been playing not quite equally with Aaron Jones, but he's certainly getting a lot of the rushing work. Jones is definitely the receiving back, but Chandler gets enough of the work that I do feel like he's worth having on your bench. He's also a very good handcuff option because if there's an injury, they've got no one behind him at all. It's like Miles Gaskin, and he's kind of on a practice squad. They just kind of bring him up occasionally. And then like CJ Ham. So I do think that if there's an injury, Ham might actually become the third down back, and Chandler does most of the work, and that would be fantastic for his value because you're not going to lose normal carries to a fullback. Finally, Ray Davis, we've seen that he can be very good when given the opportunities, but he's behind James Cook, who's been absolutely fantastic. James Cook remains the starter, but it is possible that Davis in fact, it's likely that Davis becomes very good if Cook has an injury. We haven't really seen Cook be an injury-prone player, but he's a running back, and every running back can get injured. So Davis is someone that I like sticking on my bench as well because of his upside. Wide receivers. Shocks me that Jamison Williams is still available in a sixth of leagues. He's available in your league. You must pick him up. Jackson Smith and Jigba, same thing. He's clearly taken over that wide receiver 2 role. Against New England, we thought they were going to struggle to move the ball. Instead, JSN gets 16 targets and goes for over 100 yards. That is insane. Did not see that coming. Same thing with Metcalf. He had a massive game. Both of those things shocked me. Very strange situation. But hey, great for Seattle. Nice to see Geno Smith playing well. JSN, someone that's got to be on rosters in every single league. Brian Thomas Jr. is still a positive upside guy. He's more of a big play guy. Comes with some risk. Kind of like Gabe Davis, who actually got more targets and more receptions last week. But I do think that Thomas is the guy with more upside. Kirk's only playing in 11 personnel. He's not that clear-cut number one guy that we've seen in the past. So Thomas is a guy that it's worth having a shot on if he's available. And finally, Rashid Shaheed. He was in my deeper options last week, and he had another big game. He moves up to the shallow options. I don't love him, but he does have a fantastic matchup against Philly. He's not really getting a lot of targets. He's more of like that deep threat, but he has some upside. He does have his big week. Same thing with Thomas. So for that reason, he's a solid guy to have if you need a little bit of help. Some deeper options. I mean, we talked about Puka being injured previously. Cooper Kupp obviously got injured badly this week. Real shame for the Rams, honestly, because I do kind of like the team. I kind of like the Rams in general. Not sure why. Maybe I'm just a Matthew Stafford fan. But it is a bit of a shame for them. I do think this is really going to help DeMarcus Robinson, who's a guy that I was drafting very late, knowing that if an injury happened to one of the top two, he'd become relevant. Now it's happened to both. And all of a sudden, DeMarcus Robinson is the number one guy. They ran the ball a lot last week, being very conservative. Against San Fran, you can't do that. You got to throw it. So for that reason, I do think DeMarcus Robinson gets the main lead role, and he's going to get plenty of targets. They do tend to share it around. We saw Dutu Atwell start to get involved last week. Obviously, Jordan Whittington got involved too. So it'll be interesting to see after they've had a week of planning what this looks like. But Robinson's still the main guy, and he has a lot of touchdown upside as well. In a deeper league, definitely someone you should pick up. Romeo Dobbs, I mean, we saw that he was viable last week, even though he only had 3 targets. He's still getting by far the most snaps of all the wide receivers. He is a viable option. I still prefer Reed and Watson for their upside when Love is back. But while they're doing this really run-heavy thing, I do feel like Dobbs is the best of those options. It is possible that Love comes back this week. I think they're probably cautious after Willis is pretty good. And Tennessee can't do anything with the ball at the moment anyway. Their defense is good, but they've mainly got running game. And I feel like this could be a bit of a grind fest this game. So it's not that I want to start Dobbs this week. I just feel like he's a solid bench option for when bye weeks hit. Khalil Shakir kind of started to take over from Curtis Samuel as the clear slot guy. It's not that he's getting the snaps. He's not, but he's getting the targets. Cam Coleman's out there the most. I thought that would make all the difference, but Josh Allen is clearly locked in on Shakir. I don't like this. I'm not happy about this situation, but I mean, he's someone you can have if you need a desperation bye week option because he is available in nearly half of leagues. And finally, Tyler Johnson. If DeMarcus Robinson isn't available, if you're in a slightly deeper league, kind of got Tyler Johnson down there. He's really like a super deep option realistically, but I wasn't really happy with the deep options that were available. There's no one else that really intrigued me. So Tyler Johnson's someone you can get in a deeper league, and he is someone that will become their wide receiver too. I think he could be productive, but we could see that Whittington and Atwell get involved enough to be inconvenient. Super deep options. Quentin Johnston is definitely my favorite here, and arguably could have gone in that high group. Honestly, depending on what happens, it is entirely possible that he goes well past guys like Shakir. He could even be better than all the deep options. I feel like he has the most upside of everyone here. He's a talented player. The problem is Joshua Palmer comes back. Ladd McConkey wasn't very involved last week because they were playing against the Panthers. And as I always say, the Panthers are fantastic against slot receivers for some reason. For that reason, Johnston was really able to thrive out wide, got those 2 touchdowns, including one fantastic touchdown catch and a pretty darn good throw as well. Reminds us that Justin Herbert's actually really good when they let him play. So Johnston's solid option, really good upside. In games where they're not going to run the ball, they're not going to be able to run the ball a lot. It's possible that he steps up even more and has a solid season, but realistically, I think he's a better dynasty option. Josh Reynolds, good matchup against the Bucks this week. Realistically, the clear wide receiver 2 had nearly 100 yards in week 2 and was good in week 1 as well. He's their clear number 2 guy. I've been talking about Josh Reynolds for a long time as a great deep league guy. That remains the case. Andre Yosevas, I'd have him higher, especially given he's playing against the Commanders this week, except T. Higgins might be back. So that really limits his upside. He also just tends to get used in the red zone and nowhere else. He's out there the whole time. Like, I don't think he missed a snap in week 1. It was very strange, but he really only gets targeted in red zone situations. So that gives him a big touchdown upside, and I think that probably still remains even once Higgins is back. But he's more of a boom bust option. I'm not really going out of my way to get him, but he is available in a lot of leagues, and I've got him in some deeper leagues. 32-team league styles, and a couple of 14-team leagues where we start like 5 wide receivers. Juwan Jennings is another guy that I like, especially while Deebo Samuel is out for a couple of weeks. He becomes the wide receiver 2. Last week, I knew that getting the slot guy was going to be useful. He didn't play into the slot as much as I'd hoped, but he was still solid. I do think that he's going to have some better weeks to come, but you really only want him if none of these other guys are available because he does have limited upside. Okay, let's talk about tight ends. Hunter Henry had a massive week, and I'm not shocked because I talked about this in my Streamers and Stashes article in week 1 and my Streamers and Stashes video in week 1 and my tight end videos before the start of the season. It was always possible that he was going to be the number 1 passing option for the Patriots. And admittedly, the matchup kind of helps that a little bit, but they are kind of going away from their wide receivers. And guess what? Against the Jets, you know what? The Jets are really good at shutting down wide receivers. So it's going to be hard to see guys like Polk getting much of the ball. Admittedly, they might be able to get a fair bit more to Douglas next week, but I think Hunter Henry's going to have another big game. The Jets have traditionally been quite weak against tight ends. They have improved, especially this year, but that's partly matchup dependent. We've only had 2 weeks. So I do think that Hunter Henry is going to be very good. I also just noticed, by the way, I forgot to change the thing at the top to say week 3 waiver wire. I think that's kind of obvious. Colby Parkinson had a poor week last week, got 1 reception for 12 yards, but I talked about how badly banged up the wide receivers are. I think they might look at this situation and go, hold up, we've got a good receiving tight end. Maybe we should use him a little bit. And I expect against San Fran, their passing game might get going a little bit more because it is hard to run on them. They will want to use Kyren Williams a little bit, but I think Colby Parkinson could have some better gains ahead. There's a whole heap of tight ends that are kind of like mediocre options. I think people are just getting desperate because Ingram's injured and Njoku's injured and Ferguson's injured. Though I think Ferguson's probably back, which is why I don't have Luke Schoonmaker on here. Zach Ertz is someone that's gotten 4 targets the last 2 weeks. He's turned it into a total of 90 yards. It was better this week. It could be that he turns into the number 2 option in this Washington offense. We haven't really seen another wide receiver emerge, and Terry McLaurin has struggled. He had a terrible matchup last week, admittedly. But with Jaden Daniels, it's just a whole lot of Jaden Daniels running and a whole lot of Jaden Daniels handing off to the running backs and checking down to the running backs. If he starts checking down to the tight ends a little bit more, that would really help Ertz, but we haven't seen it happen yet, so I'm not willing to actually start Ertz, even though the early consensus rankings for Fantasy Pros have Ertz as a top 12 tight end. I will probably not. Janu Smith had a really good game, which shocked me because he wasn't getting enough snaps in week 1. As it turns out, he's still not getting enough snaps. He played 32 snaps, which is really low, but he ran around on 31 of them. That is high for a wide receiver. Very, 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 very high for a wide receiver. He basically only had 1 snap where he was blocking. He was basically just working as a receiving tight end. Kind of insane. Now, to be fair, he's not the greatest blocker, and he is a good receiving tight end, and they really did kind of lock in on him. So I don't know if that's going to continue happening. They've still got Hill and Waddle. Most teams aren't going to be able to cover Hill and Waddle. We also don't know what's going to happen now with Skylar Thompson. That's going to mix things up, but it might be, and it often works out this way, that mediocre quarterbacks do tend to use their tight ends a little bit more. So we could see Smith get a little bit more busy after his big game. He's someone that's worth stashing just in case. I wouldn't start him this week. And finally, streamers. I mean, I talk about this every week. Start kickers and DSTs against Carolina. Running backs, kickers, DSTs against Carolina. You just have to do it. Same thing happened last week. They were fantastic. Dicker and in particular the Chargers DST. This week it's Daniel Carson, who already had a good week last week. And the Raiders DST, I mean, Max Crosby against that line, against Andy Dalton. I mean, look, don't get me wrong, Bryce Young's been bad, but is Andy Dalton the answer? I don't know. It might be a slightly more functional offense, but still think you're going to see a lot of sacks with a totally immobile quarterback. So Raiders DST is going to be very productive. Cairo Santos I like against Indy. I tend to like him in most matchups. They really struggle to finish drives, but they have so many weapons that they kind of are able to move the ball enough. And Indy's kind of just in general weak. So I think Santos could have a good week. And finally, the Packers DST against Tennessee. I think that's going to be a real grind fest, low-scoring game. We've seen Will Levis has really struggled. The Titans have given away the most points to DSTs across the league. So that's going to be great for the Packers, who do have a solid defense. They were top 10 last week. And that's all we've got for the waiver wire. If you have any waiver wire questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. Or, of course, you can message me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. My rankings will be out soon enough on ffdfantasyfootball.com. And you can, of course, and I hope you do, like and subscribe on YouTube. I also have a Streamers and Stashes article coming out in the next day at football.rasball.com. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next day or two for my Streamers and Stashes video. I will see you soon.